But here we go in our sermon series. We are continuing this on. We have 2 more weeks. And let me say this real quick before we get started on today's. In 2 weeks, the beginning of September, we'll start a new sermon series. I'll tell you the name of it next week, but I'm not telling you that yet this week. Make plans on being here because it's going to be like I try to do in every September. We try to do some type of interactive, like group church sermon series where there's stuff to do outside of just being here in service. And that's what this one's going to be. So just make plans. September, need to be here for those like 5 or is it 6 weeks? Heather's not in here right now. She went that way. 5 or 6 weeks. But there's several things that you'll be challenged with after service each week that we're going to do as a group together, all right? So just make plans for that. Getting back to this week, we are still in the Exodus, and we are walking through the life of Moses, and we're seeing the progression through the book of Exodus where Moses becomes an incredible servant of God and doing kingdom work where before he met God, he was just a typical guy living life, okay? And we're watching this progression that he goes through. Let me just review where we've been because I like to do this if you haven't been here from week to week in the story. Let me walk you through the chapters real quick. Chapter 1, we see the Israelites being enslaved by the Egyptians. Chapter 2, Moses is born. He eventually is adopted into the royal family. He eventually picks being associated with with God's people rather than being part of the Egyptian royal family, which leads to him being an outcast, which is, we talked about, this is the first step of being a kingdom worker, of the process that happens, and that is choosing God. First, you have to choose God. Eventually, what we see is he flees Egypt into the wilderness. In chapter 3, he's living life. He sees a burning bush. He goes over to the burning bush. God talks to him there. And God basically goes, Moses, I'm taking you out of your routine, and I'm going to have you do something special in my name. And he basically says, you're going to go free my people from their slavery, so you need to head back to Egypt. Chapter 4, God lays out the plan and says, Moses, here's the plan. Here's what you can expect. And what we see is this. Moses starts expressing all of his fears of why he's not the right guy and begging God to send someone else. Finally, by the end of chapter 4, after all of his excuse making, he finally agrees to head back to Egypt, which is step 2 in the process of becoming a kingdom worker, which is this, it's overcoming your fears that we talked about in that week. Chapter 5, Moses meets the leaders. He kind of tells them a plan, the leaders of Israel, tells them a plan. He heads over to Pharaoh, tells Pharaoh, let my people go. It says Pharaoh increases their workload and is more abusive to them than ever been. It says the people of Israel then go back to Moses and they blame Moses for messing up their lives. And then what we see is Moses goes to God and blames God for messing up his life. Okay, that's what we see last week. He goes into chapter 6. From that point, God reassures Moses and says, stick with me. I've got a plan. Just stick with me. I know what I'm doing. And he tells Moses, go tell the people the same thing. Moses goes and tells people, stick with God. He knows what he's doing. It says the people don't care anymore, and they go, we don't care, Moses. Just get away from us. We don't want to hear you anymore. And it's at this point we left off last week, which is Moses runs back to his fears again, goes back to God and says, I am not the right guy because things aren't going the way I thought they should. And because they're not going as easily as I thought they should, I'm not the right guy. Let me bail on this thing. Let me go back to my life. Pick someone else. That's where we ended last week. And we talked about the third part of the process of becoming an incredible kingdom worker for God's kingdom is being able to overcome your false expectations. And we talked about when we start things with God, we think it's all going to be smooth sailing, but usually it's not. And what we usually do, like Moses, is when it gets hard, we go, I give up and I'm just going to go back to my regular routine. And we see there that that is not the route God desires for you to go. That gets us to chapter 7, into new material today. And it's chapter 7 and beyond. And here's what it reads at the beginning of chapter 7. Moses has just said, God, let me out of this thing. God has said, no, Moses, you're still my guy. You're going to do my work. Here's what he says in verse 1. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, pay close attention to this. I will make you seem like a god to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. Tell Aaron everything I command you, and Aaron must command Pharaoh to let the people of Israel leave his country. But I will make Pharaoh's heart stubborn, so I can multiply my miraculous signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. Even then, Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, so I will bring down my fist on Egypt. Then I will rescue my forces, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with great acts of judgment. When I raise my powerful hand and I bring out the Israelites, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So God says this to Moses, and the next thing we see is Moses and Aaron then, they head back to Pharaoh, and they go before Pharaoh, and they say, Pharaoh, listen up. We're back for a second time, and here's the deal. You need to let God's people go. And Pharaoh's response this time is this. He basically goes, why should I listen to you guys? Why do I even care what you have to say, Moses? And it says at that point, this is where Aaron takes his staff, and he throws it on the ground, and it becomes a snake. And it's kind of to display God's power. But it says this, it's kind of interesting. It says Pharaoh has all these magicians. They come over and they do the same thing, and they're able to throw staffs down to the ground and they become snakes. And at that point, Pharaoh's not real impressed, and Pharaoh basically says to Moses and Aaron, why don't you guys just move along? Why don't you get out of my presence? Stop wasting my time. And that's kind of how that goes. The next day, what happens? Moses and Aaron, the next day go out, and God tells them, meet Pharaoh down by the Nile River. And you need to make the demands again. So they go down. Pharaoh's walking down. He comes down to the river. Moses and Aaron meet them there, and they go, Pharaoh, you need to let God's people go. If you do not, he's going to turn this river into blood, and you will have no water to drink for your people. And Pharaoh basically says, get out of my way, whatever. And it says Aaron takes his staff, touches the water, and it becomes blood, or translation-wise, we don't really know, blood or like blood. Not really sure, but if you see this picture, I assume it's something like that. That's one of those algae plumes that you see from time to time that turn the water and makes it undrinkable and makes it unhealthy to drink the water. So we don't know if it was like blood or actual blood, but it says it wasn't just the Nile River, it's all the water in the land. But it says Pharaoh again takes his magicians, they can do the same thing. So again, Pharaoh's not real impressed, and he's just like, you guys need to go along, go on your way again, get out of my presence, I'm sick of seeing you guys. At this point, Moses and Aaron, they take a week off. They go back to kind of maybe reset things, whatever. But a week later, God comes to them and he says, Moses, Aaron, go back, make your demands again, and you tell Pharaoh this time, if he doesn't let them go, I'm going to send a plague of frogs upon these people. So they walk back. They get back to Pharaoh. They say, Pharaoh, let them go. And Pharaoh's like, I'm not letting anyone go. And they go, okay, God's going to send frogs upon this land. And here's, if you don't, and he's not, I'm not going to let them go. And Pharaoh says, okay. So the plague of frogs starts. Now, how many of you like frogs? Some of you like frogs. How many of you are actually afraid of frogs? Like deathly afraid of? Is there anyone here with that fear? No one really has that fear. Okay, so we have frogs. This is modern times. These plagues you're going to see are not things that don't happen, but to have them happen on the multitude they happen in Exodus is off the charts. But these are plagues of frogs. That's got to be China or somewhere. But can you imagine this? And it says, scripturally, it says, you have this type of stuff in all the homes. It's all over everywhere, and people can't escape from them. And it says this. It says Pharaoh, again, gets his magicians together. They can perform the same thing, and somehow they create frogs, and they create like a mini plague. But obviously, not the same one Pharaoh or that Moses created. Because what it says is this. After the frogs get into everybody's houses and everything else, this time Pharaoh goes, would you request Aaron and Moses come back to me? And he requests, and they come back before him, and he says, okay, here's the deal. This one's starting to freak me out a little bit. Could you ask God to kind of stop this? And it says Moses and Aaron comply, and they say, okay, we'll stop this if you let our people go. And he says, I'll let your people go. Just get rid of the frogs. And it says Moses prays, all the frogs die, and it just creates a stench in the land because there's all these carcasses. And it says they're piling the frogs up in the streets out of their homes. Okay? So that's what happens there. And this is the first time we see this. After the plague stops and everything goes away, Pharaoh reneges. Pharaoh goes, now, you know what? I'm not really going to let you go. Verse 15, it says, but when Pharaoh saw that the relief had come, he became stubborn. He refused to listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had predicted. And you're going to see this is a pattern Pharaoh has now, which is, yeah, I'll let you go, but when the consequences are gone, yeah, maybe not. Okay? The next thing we see is this. Once he reneges, God sends in the gnats. Okay? Now, frogs, I think I could live with. The gnats, this would start to get to me. Let me show you a picture here. Gnats, you guys know those. That's not what they always look like. You can see them in the sky, you know, like the little pockets of them, and you walk through them sometimes, and they're like, and they go all over you, okay? Just annoying little things. Not horrible, but annoying. Now, think of this. Think of them everywhere. They're in your homes. They're in your bedroom when you're trying to sleep. They're in your kitchen when you're trying to cook. Gnats are everywhere in the land. And it says at this point, again, Pharaoh grabs his guys together and he says, you guys, show me the same thing. And it says at this point, they can't do it though. This is the one that his magicians, they're going, we can't do anything with this one. And they say this to him. Verse 19, it says, "This is the finger of God," the magicians exclaimed to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He would not listen to them, just as the Lord had predicted. So this one, they go, you know what, Pharaoh? We can't touch this stuff. We don't know how this is being done, but this is the hand of God. This isn't anything man can do. So you have them start realizing that. What happens next is this. God tells Moses, go confront Pharaoh again. And he goes, if he doesn't come down to your demands, if he doesn't let the people go, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to send flies in. And flies are going to consume everything. So he goes back and he says, Pharaoh, let the people go, or God says flies are coming. And he says no, and the flies come. Now, this is where it starts to get a little irritating, okay? Here's what we find. We find this is where things kind of go into chaos in Egypt. Let me give you pictures of flies. That is, you might think that's locusts. No, that's actually a swarm of flies. Somewhere, I don't know what country that is, but that's actually flies. This picture here, no joke, that was on my house this week. So I had not seen one of those down here. That's a brick. So a brick, that thing had to be at least over an inch big. And it was sitting on a brick, and it wouldn't walk away from me. I'm like tapping it, and it just crawled around the corner. There's a corner right here on my house, and it just crawled around the corner. I'm like, it's not even scared of me. It even knows it could kill me. All right? So I'm looking at this thing, and I don't know what type of fly it is. I know up in Michigan, we had what was called deer flies or horse flies that were terrible up there that, man, they bite you and they draw blood. And they just swarm around you and bite. I don't know if that's what that was. And I don't know if that's what God sends in. But even house flies, yesterday I killed 7 in my house. They annoy the snot on me. Because you hear them up against the windows like zzz, zzz. You know what I mean? You guys all have to feel this way. Flies are the most annoying pests, and I don't know why God created them and mosquitoes. I don't get, but hey, God knows something I don't know. But the flies come, they cover everything. It says it throws everything into chaos because they're so annoying. You can't ignore the flies. They cause everyone to go into chaos. And this is a switch too. For the first time, what happens is this. God says the flies are going to be on you, but they're not going to be on the Israelites over where they live. And they live off in Goshen, which is this area away from the main cities. And he says, so you're going to be inundated with flies. They're going to have nothing. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you a distinction between my people and you. And I want you to understand who I have chosen and who are my people and who are not. And God makes this distinction. So there are no flies on the Israelites, but the Egyptians are covered in them. All right, so that is that plague. Next thing we see in chapter 9 is Pharaoh again calls Moses back, and he says, Moses, I'll let him go. Just call the flies off. Moses calls the flies off, and what's he do? He reneges again. And he goes, nah, you know what? The flies are dead. I think you're going to stay. You don't get to go. That leads into chapter 9. Chapter 9 is a plague of the livestock. What it says here is disease hits all their livestock, and it wipes out a great majority of their livestock. We still see these things today. This is just one instance here. Those are all carcasses of an entire herd wiped out from some disease, okay? In the world today, we still have right now, the most famous one you hear is mad cow's disease that you've heard over probably the last 8 to 10 years, where it can wipe out entire groups of cows, or they have to slaughter them all so that it doesn't spread somewhere else. This hits all the Egyptian livestock. It starts to wipe out all of their food and all their animals. Again, the distinction sets out, which is this. It's not going to affect the Israelite herds. All their animals are going to be fine, but yours are going to be affected. Here's what it writes in verse 7 of chapter 9. It says, Pharaoh sent his officials to investigate, and they discovered that the Israelites had not lost a single animal. But even so, Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn, and he still refused to let the people go. You see, Pharaoh at this point went, yeah, you're telling me it's not affecting God's people? I don't believe you with the flies. Livestock thing hurts, and he goes, you guys need to go over and see if it's affecting them. And the report comes back, they haven't lost anything. They're perfectly fine. It's only our stuff that's being affected. And yet Pharaoh still goes, no, you're not going. The next plague is this, the plague of boils. Okay? You didn't want to see the pictures of boils, okay? So I put the Lego guys up just to protect you this morning, okay? Boils are this. It says it affects all the people and the Lego guys that they were playing with, all the people and all the animals that they had. Doesn't affect the Israelites, but them. What boils were was this. They are sores that grow and then eventually pop, so you have open sores and just like stuff pussing out of you constantly all over the place, and it just gets all over your body. Best way some describe it is a severe case of like chicken pox. It doesn't really go away, and instead of the things healing up, they don't heal up, and it's just like festering sores all over you, okay? That hits the animals. It hits the people. I saved your eyes so you wouldn't have to see it because I typed in yesterday on Google, I'm like boils, human boils or something. I'm like, oh, yeah, we can't show those pictures, okay? Didn't want you to see those. So then I found the Lego picture. I'm like, yeah, that works. Lego guys. So the boils hit. Pharaoh still refuses. Next one it hits, the plague of hail. So hail comes next. This one it says it kills basically whatever animals are still left. It destroys most of their crops, and it's such hail size and stuff, it starts to break the trees down. So the trees start to break down. Now, on my horrible journey to Colorado, with some of our team, who are the survivors? 3 survivors up front with me here, and me 4, 5. The girl that coughed blood, I still love you. Still love you, Autumn, all the time for that. Okay, we saw hail. We're up in the mountains of Colorado. We got, what, half an inch to 3/4 of an inch of hail, and it hailed for 45 straight minutes. And it wiped out anybody that had the super strong tents. It wiped all the rain guards off and took the tops off all of them and then drenched everybody's stuff inside the tent. So we know hail. We don't know hail like this. This is hail so big that it's killing animals when it falls. It says people that step outside, it kills them. Oklahomans, you know hail. What's the biggest hail any of you have ever seen? Because I've seen here, okay, you've seen baseball, like almost what size? You've seen almost softball size. Baseball size, no, you didn't see like whatever size that, a beach ball size. No way, are you kidding me? But softball size, whatever it is, things that are killing people when it comes out. I remember when I first moved here, like you must have had a hailstorm within 6 months when I first moved here, and everyone's cars had like the dings all over them. I'm like, what's with the cars? And they're like, hailstorm, it just dings up all the cars. I'm like, oh, hope that doesn't happen. So whenever a storm happens here, I actually pull up underneath that yawning out there, so the offices, and we all like pull up in different areas so we don't ding up our cars, because I don't want like a scratch on my car or something. That'd be terrible, okay? But anyways, the hail comes, hail wipes out the rest of the animals, it wipes out a lot of their food, and that whole thing stops, and at this point, Pharaoh starts to crack. This is the first time we see Pharaoh cracking. Here's what it says in verse 27. It says, then Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron. This time I have sinned. Now he's using words like, I have sinned. Okay? He's never done this. He says he confessed. The Lord is a righteous one, and my people are wrong. Please beg the Lord to end this terrifying thunder and hail. We've had enough. I will let you go. You don't need to stay any longer. So Moses goes, okay, I'll pray it off, and it all stops. What we see very quickly is this. Pharaoh reneges. Pharaoh goes, consequences are gone. I'm not going to let you go. You're staying here. No way are you getting out. Chapter 10 happens. At the beginning of chapter 10, the next plague comes in. It's a plague of locusts. Let me show you locusts. This is a plague of locusts. These still happen at times, and they say they black out the skies even today when they come in. The biblical reference says here, this will be the worst plague of locusts you've ever seen or ever will be, and they will come in and they will wipe out everything. And the locusts come in, and they eat any vegetation that's left, and they strip off every leaf that's on any tree that's still standing, and they go on their way, and they strip the land of everything. And it's at this point that the Egyptian people crack. And they come before Pharaoh. It says this in verse 7 of chapter 10. It says, Pharaoh's officials now came to Pharaoh and appealed to him. How long will you let this man hold us hostage? Let the men go to worship their Lord, their God. Don't you realize that Egypt lies in ruins? And again, Pharaoh agrees to let them go, but then he reneges. But this time, he now has his own people going, our lives are all destroyed. Can you not figure this out? Would you please stop it and just let them go? And he still will not. That sends in the 9th plague. And the 9th plague is this. It's a plague of darkness. And it says the skies go black. They're out. It says people cannot see even their hand in front of them. And it says people basically just don't move. In 3 days of complete darkness, no sunlight, no nothing. Yet over with the Israelites, they have sun and everything's perfect and dandy. But with the Egyptians, it is pitch black for 3 days, and it just says everyone just hunkers down. Now, very few of us know what that's like anymore because we live with electricity. To just be in pitch black all the time. The closest I have, 2003, some of you have heard the story, I'm not going to give all details, just real quick. 2003, if you remember, the Northeast and the upper Midwest lost power. Do you remember that? The Niagara Falls power station went out and it wiped out the whole power grid. We were without power for about 3.5 days up there. I happened to be at Cedar Point, which is a huge roller coaster park, with about 80 teenagers on a trip with them. And all the roller coasters stopped in the middle of their roller coasters, okay? And they were all just hanging up on there. Thankfully, none of my kids were. But I remember it was the weirdest thing coming out of a building. We just got off a roller coaster. We came out and we were trying to get back on. We're standing in line and the emergency lights come on and everything got real silent. And we're like, that's weird. And people come in and are like, everybody out, everybody out. And we walk out and we walk into this park that probably has about 60 to 70,000 people in it. And it's just like quiet. And you're like, what's going on? And you start looking around and you see roller coasters like just stuck on the roller coasters. And we went through that night, got our kids back in our van, worried to death we couldn't get gas because we didn't gas up coming in. We drive back, and this is the most eerie thing I've ever seen in my life. We drive back from Ohio and we come back into the Detroit metro area, okay? The Detroit metro area is 6 million people. Downtown Detroit probably is 8 to 10 times the size of what you see in the city skyline down in Tulsa. 8 to 10 times that size. We are driving downtown Detroit, and you can't see that any buildings exist. We're just driving on a highway, and I remember seeing the signs going, we're at Gratiot, we're at Woodward, and I'm like, Detroit Tigers ballpark's like literally 50 feet from us. I can't see it. And it was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. And I remember driving back up into the suburbs, and we're in the suburbs. There's this massive mall, that Lakeside Mall that we used to go to. We're on the corner where Lakeside Mall is right there. You can't see it. And we're just like, this is weird. There's no cars on the road because we're getting back at like 2 a.m. in the morning. There's no cars anywhere. No one's around. And for 3 days, we sat up there with no power. And every night, I remember it would turn like 7:30, and the sun starts going down, and it goes dark, and at like 10 o'clock, it's just pitch dark, and you're just sitting there like, this is here. You have nothing inside. You got candles set up. We kind of went through it a little bit. We remember the ice storm here, where it wiped out for probably 6 or 7 days for some of us, where you were living on candles and stuff like that for days. It was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen, where the entire city was gone black. That's what these people experience. They are in Egypt, well-developed area, and it goes black. There's no sunlight. There's nothing. And it just says everyone just kind of hunkers down and goes, I'm not moving. At this point, this is where Pharaoh snaps. And Pharaoh calls for Moses and Aaron to come back, and he brings them back before him. Doesn't say, I'm letting you go or anything. He just says, I don't want you ever to come in my presence again. Get out of my face and never come back to me. I never want to see you again. And he kicks them out of his presence. This is where the last plague comes in, and this is the plague of Passover. It is a plague of the firstborn. And how many of you know the Jewish word Passover? Let me explain where this came from. It's a holiday the Jews celebrate every year. What happened was the last plague, God says this. What's going to happen in this last plague is every firstborn child in the entire land of Egypt is going to die this night. Okay? That means every firstborn child of that kid. How many of you are firstborn children in here? Stand up. Let me do this. Stand up if you're a firstborn child. In the society of Egypt, the next morning, all these people are dead. Dude, could you imagine? That'd be kind of, well, I don't know if that's all bad or not. No. Okay. So you're talking probably a third are going to die. So he comes and he says, here's the last plague. All firstborn children will die. And he says, you Israelites, here's what you're going to do. You're going to celebrate because you're going to see the hand of God and the power of God tonight, and you are never to forget this night. And he says, what you need to do is you're going to have a celebration with your families because God's going to rescue you tonight. And what you need to do is have this meal, and you're going to cook a lamb, and you're going to take the blood of the lamb, and you're going to go to your doorpost outside your door of your house, and you're going to put blood over the door. And what's going to happen is tonight when a death angel comes in to kill all the firstborn, when it sees that your house is marked with the blood of the lamb, it will pass over. That's how you get the name Passover. Okay, it's the Passover. It's where God's hand passed over them and saved them. So they have their festivals. They do all their stuff. They put blood above their outside their doors. And that night, the death angel comes, and it wipes out all the firstborn of Egypt. And here's the account it reads in verse 28 of chapter 12. It says, "So the people of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded through Moses and Aaron. And that night at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn son of the prisoner in the dungeon. Even the firstborn of their livestock were killed. Pharaoh and all of his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during the night, and loud wailing was heard throughout the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died." So mass chaos. You can imagine what this would sound like. You're talking millions of people waking up realizing they've just lost loved ones, children, parents. People are just dead everywhere, and people are just screaming, and there's mass panic, mass chaos at this point that night, and the Israelites are in their beds sleeping, knowing that God has passed over. At this point, Pharaoh says, "Get them out of here. Get them out. They can all go. Send them away." Moses at this point, what he says is, Moses says, "Guys, when you are exiting, you go to the Egyptians and you ask them for supplies for your journey, and they're going to give you their stuff." And here's that account. It says in verse 35, "And the people of Israel did as Moses had instructed. They asked the Egyptians for clothing and articles of silver and gold. The Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites, and they gave the Israelites whatever they asked for. So they stripped the Egyptians of all their wealth. And the people leave with all the Egyptian wealth, and they walk away." All right? That is the account of the plagues. It's a long story. It's something we had to get through this morning. And here's what I want to talk about briefly here at the end. I want to make a very simple point today that I learned as I was going through this. And it's about this. Delaying to deal with the sin in your life will only cause you more pain and the people in your life more pain in the long run. The longer you wait, the larger the consequences will become if you delay to deal with the sins in your life. Look at the progression of the consequences for Pharaoh based on his sins. If you look at the different plagues here, go to the next slide there. Go to the next one. Right here. He starts off with a very simple this. It's a snake. It's not hurting anyone. It's not really causing any damage. He could have wiped his hands and said, "Okay, I can see God's display on power, and I'm going to walk away from this. You people can go." Then it turns into water and blood. That's pretty bad. Frogs, gnats, flies. Then it gets into plague of livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, eventually the death of all the firstborn sons and daughters and everyone in the land of Egypt. And what you see is this, just like this holds true for Pharaoh, it holds true for us, which is the longer you delay to deal with the sins in your life, the more consequences there are at the end of the day when you do choose to deal with them. We as humans, we have a very nasty habit of taking our sins and waiting to deal with them until it breaks us and we are forced to have to deal with them. Our sins, the longer we hold on to them, start to consume us. They take more and more of our attention. Eventually, they get to a point in our lives where people who care for us can even walk up to us and they can say, "Hey, you know what? You've got an issue with this that you probably need to deal with." And we will go, "I don't want to hear you. I don't want to hear you. Because I am so consumed by my sin at this point, I don't want to hear anyone else's perspective because I'm okay with it and I've accepted it and it's just part of my life." And what I want you to get from the point today is it's nothing to do with Moses today. It's everything to do with Pharaoh. The longer you keep putting it off, the more damage you do to the people around you and to yourself. And if you don't deal with it before it gets too bad, it can rip your entire life to shreds. And it can rip everyone else's life around you to shreds. If you want to be a productive kingdom worker for Jesus Christ, you need to deal with the sins in your life before they discredit you or ultimately destroy you. You need to deal with them. Hebrews chapter 12, it reads this. It reads, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance a race God has set before us. The author here tells you this. If you want to run the race for God, you need to get rid of the sin in your life that trips you up. It is the thing that will slow you down. It's the thing that will make you not as productive as you could be and stops you from being a person God wants you to be in this life. So you need to take your sins seriously, and you need to find ways to strip it off of your life so you can run unhindered the race that God has put before you. What I would tell you is this: don't follow the path of Pharaoh. It never ends well. It never ends well when you delay dealing with your sins. Would you pray with me?